So this Sunday and the next 3 Sundays, we're going to be having sermons, not homilies. You know the difference, right? A sermon is a preaching on a topical subject, and a homily is based on the scriptures. Now you can say anything on a topical subject comes from the scriptures. But what we're going to talk about for the next 4 weeks is the Kerygma. What's Kerygma? What's the Kerygma? I'll give you a clue. It's a Greek word. We've already heard some Greek at Mass today, which is? The Kyrie, yes. That's probably the last vestige we have of the ancient liturgy from the early church. So Kerygma is a Greek word, and to us it's just this strange word. But for the people in Jesus' day and in the early church, this had profound meaning. And what the Kerygma is, effectively, it means proclamation. And people understood it because the emperors would have proclamation. But it came to mean in the early church the basic gospel message. The Kerygma. The basic gospel message that we see preached by the apostles and disciples. And for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be looking at the 4 key elements of the Kerygma. And for a very important reason. As Catholics, we are real good at the other word that was also important in the early church, which is another Greek word, didache, which means teaching. Kerygma is the foundation. Didache is what you build on it. The basic gospel message has to be the foundation. The teaching of the church goes on top of that. That's the structure. We are very good at the didache, teaching element as Catholics. We have documents and teachings on just about everything, which makes sense if you've been in existence for nearly 2,000 years. But often we lose sight of the basic gospel message, which is the foundation. And the problem is, as any of us have built anything know, if you don't have a foundation and you build something on it, what happens? It falls down or whatever. And Jesus uses that in the parables. He has the parable of the house built on the rock and the house built on the sand. And you want to build your house on the rock. And this is part of our Catholic faith as well. Why is this so important? As that late, great 20th century American philosopher Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Which actually is not his original saying. It comes from the Cheshire Cat and Alice in the Looking Glass. But we laugh when we hear it. If we don't know where we're going, any road will get us there. We're like a ball in a pinball machine. But that's not how we're called to be as Catholic Christians. We need to ask ourselves, why do we exist? What are we here for? What's our purpose and direction in life? When I was in the military years ago, this was before we had handheld GPSs, we had to read by compass and map. So if I'm standing here with a compass and I get a degree off here, when I'm downrange there, am I still going to just be that 1 degree off? No, because as I go, it does this. Does any of you who sail or fly know? Of course, today it's easy. You just punch in the GPS stuff. But it's important that we know where we're going. We know who we are, what we're about, and where we're going. This is something we've been examining in the Archdiocese. We ask ourselves, why do we exist? We exist to witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then everything starts flowing from there and following from there. Now, as Catholics, we're really good at complicating simple things like that. Years ago, when I did campus ministry back in the Midwest, I found this formula. I loved it. I've lost it. I can't find it now. I wish I had it to show you. It was a massive scientific equation plus another massive scientific equation equals another massive scientific equation. And in all the years I've used it in student retreats and other retreats, only once has somebody ever figured out what it is. And only because they got one of the 3. He got the second one, which was 1. And he guessed 1 plus 1 equals 2. And that is the correct answer. 1 plus 1 equals 2. And we tend to complicate it that way. So what we want to do is refocus and remind ourselves of who we are, what our purpose in life is, why we exist, and what we're doing as Catholics. And we're going to simplify it into 4 elements. And we're going to preach about these for the next 4 weeks. And those 4 elements, very simply, one word for each, will expand. Created, captured, rescued, respond. So for all you old rockheads, CCR plus R, right? Right, Tim?
Oh, yes.
So created, captured, rescued, and respond. Created because God created everything out of nothing. And there was an innate goodness of creation. And I'm going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. Father Chuck will be following up with the rest in the next few weeks. Captured. This was wonderful, except that our first parents were deceived by the devil and were captured by the devil and became enslaved to death and sin. But there's hope. God, in his love, decided to rescue us and do what we could not do. And Jesus came into this world, which we'll celebrate at Christmas, the Incarnation, took sin and death upon himself, broke the power of the evil one, and set us free, and gave us a way to be reconciled with God. And the 4th one is respond. God has done this out of love for us. How are we going to respond? Because God has given us freedom. So let's talk about created. God created. That's the bottom line. God created. However that came to be, whatever happened, God is the author of creation. The scriptures give us 2 creation accounts, which helps us understand this is not meant to be literal. This was the Jewish people's way of trying to portray, in the midst of all of this, God created something out of nothing, however that came to be. And they are acknowledging God as the author of it all. The Bible tells us why, not how. So why did God create? Why did God create this immense thing known as creation? Let's stop for a moment. How big is the universe? The universe is approximately, and it keeps expanding and going out, 100 billion light years across. In this universe, there are approximately 100 billion galaxies. In our galaxy, there's approximately 100 billion stars. And we're in the middle of it. We're like a grain of sand in this room, except that the room of the church is continuing to expand. That is big. Really, really, really big. And God created it all by his will. Some of you may remember that iconic moment when Apollo 8 was circling the moon. It was on Christmas in 1968. The first time a manned spacecraft had gone to the moon. And there was that moment as they came around the moon and they're looking at the moon's surface and the blackness of space. And what did they see coming up? Not the sun, but Earth. And there's this series of photos called Earthrise. And they look, and part of it is dark, but the top part, you can see the blue of the oceans and everything else. And it was amazing because on Christmas Eve, the astronauts read the creation story from Genesis back on the radio to everyone who was listening. But those astronauts said that forever changed them. Because we're in the midst of our world here and we're looking out. And suddenly they were looking back. It's in the immensity of creation and seeing Earth that God had created for us. In the midst of his creation, God put humanity, man and woman. And we are the high point of his creation, because we are both spiritual and material beings. And God placed life within us and gave us souls. And we see this portrayed in the biblical story. God created us to live in union with him, to be in friendship with him, and to be his stewards of all creation. That's why the Catholic Church takes an interest in how we treat our world. Goes back to the creation story. God gave us responsibilities in the midst of all this. God is concerned about this. And God intended us to live in eternal harmony with him. And we have the description in the scriptures that God would walk with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day in the garden. Now that mention of a garden, which was called paradise, had profound meaning for the Jewish world and the ancient world. We don't hear it that way, so we have to learn about it. But what the kings would do in those days is they would have these walled gardens, which is all beautiful inside. Now, if you've been to the Middle East, you know greenery and lush things. You don't see it there because it's so dry and rocky and so on. But the kings would have these walled gardens where they would go to enjoy all the beauty of all this. And they would take their most trusted advisors and friends with them. If the king invited you into the walled garden, you knew that you were very close to him. So the imagery that's used in the scriptures is intended to portray the friendship, the love, the affection, the union that God intended for humanity to have with him. Why did God do all this? Why did God create? Did he just decide, I want to do something different today, so we'll create a universe? Why did God create? You have to look at the heart of God, God as a Trinity. And what is at the essence of the Trinity is relationship, love. And love in its perfect form does not look inward. It looks beyond. Real love is self-giving, self-sacrificial, aimed at others. It's a perversion of love that looks at ourselves first and is inwardly focused. But stop and think about our own relationships, our own friendships, where we are in those kind of relationships. Perhaps if you are or have been married, perhaps when you're in deep friendships like that, what happens in those moments? When we start to grow in love, friendship, and affection of somebody, what do? What does it do to us? We begin to open our lives to that person or those people. And hopefully they respond by opening their lives to us. And we start to share our lives with one another. And we start to love what they love. Not because we thought it was great at first, but we love that because they love that. That's how our human relationships work. That's the relationship God intends for each one of us with him. God opens his life to us and invites us to respond. But we are free. God gave us freedom from the beginning. From the very beginning, he gave us freedom. Why? Because is it really self-giving, self-sacrificial love when we're a bunch of mindless automatons and robots just acting the way we're programmed? No, it isn't. So for us to be able to have the opportunity to respond in love, friendship, and affection that way to God, he had to give us freedom from the beginning. We love that freedom for ourselves. Sometimes not so much for other people. But that's the gift God gave us. That's why the last part of the basic gospel message, the Kerygma, is respond. How will we respond? God invites us to respond, and we see this throughout the scriptures with Jesus. Jesus invites people to respond. Some do, some do not. But we have that freedom. So God wanted to share his love with others, and so he created a universe at the center of which are you and I. Why did he do that? I don't know. Maybe we can ask him when we see him face to face. But this is how he did it. And this is the original deal. This is what God wanted. This is what God intended. In the midst of his creation, that in that union and that friendship, love, and affection with the Lord and one another, we would live and be stewards over all creation. Sounds a wonderful deal. But as I mentioned earlier, a little problem arose. As the devil came and deceived our original parents, it's like we had this wonderful operating system going, and a very nasty piece of malware got in. And we couldn't fix it. But there's great hope because God decided to fix it himself. And we got a better deal out of it. That's why the Easter Vigil, when they sing the Exultat, they sing, "O happy fault, O necessary sin of Adam." Because God gave us back not only what He originally gave us, but a whole lot more. As we reflect on all of this, let us take a moment and thank God in the silence of our hearts for his incredible love, kindness, affection, mercy for each one of us. That he loved us so much that he created all of this. He loved us so much that he gave himself for us. And that when we messed up, he didn't let go. He came back and gave us even more.